All right, so this is a little intro before the Michael the Flem conversation. So we had originally planned to talk about his book on Atlantis, and we touched briefly on that, but it ended up being more a discussion about the importance of discernment and the importance of making sure that we don't abandon reason and logic in favor of the next shiny thing, the next anti-authoritarian, anti-establishment narrative. And we just really go deep on a bunch of subjects. And Michael and I have actually decided that we're going to co-host a show together, which will be featured initially on White Lotus of Light, and then we'll probably have it parallel on its own channel, and then eventually it'll become its own thing where we work together. But it's going to start here in the channel. And so I'm going to have Michael on, and we're gonna do a variety of different subjects, but we're probably gonna do a history series because Michael is a history professor. And so we're gonna get into that in the future. And I think this conversation is actually fantastic, even though we talked about the difference between like primary textual sources versus gnosis versus spirits and channeling, and when you can sort of accept that secondhand information like gnosis from the angels that I receive, or channeling that Edgar Casey did about Atlantis. We just have a whole discussion about the vetting of sources, which I think is such an important conversation in this time of fifth generational warfare, where there's so many confusing and strange narratives. There's so much propaganda and psychological warfare. It can be very difficult to orient oneself in that. And so I think it's a beautiful and incredible discussion. And so that will be starting here very shortly. But here at the beginning, I am closing. I decided to extend it one day since this video is coming out a little later than I wanted. I'm extending for one day until the end of the day, May 1st. So that's midnight Pacific Standard Time. May 1st will be the last day that you can do a chart reading with me that is at a tier lower than the deep dive natal and Navamsa chart. So if you're looking to get a standalone chart, natal or Navamsa, just the regular depth chart, or even a deep dive chart, and you just want to do a standalone, you have until midnight on May 1st Pacific Standard Time in order to book a reading, and it will be closed after that. I'm extending it just one day because this video came out later than I expected. I also am going to be teaching on May 16th an Angelic Magic class. And so there's going to be a first time thing on this channel. I'm going to have a 3-minute advertisement that follows this. I think it's really beautiful, visually well done. Clint Corley is incredible. And I think that there's a lot of value in it. And so if you're interested in the Angelic Magic class, or you're just interested to see it because I think it's quite a beautiful little advertisement, then go ahead and watch it and enjoy it. If that's not something that interests you, and you just want to get to the meat of the show, just go ahead and skip the next 3 minutes. All right, thank you so much. And I look forward to working with those of you who feel the call for angelic magic or an astrology chart being done. All right, talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Are you seeking a deeper connection to the divine, along with a personal journey of transformation? Welcome to Angelic Magic Classes with White Lotus of Light, where the light of the angels guides you through the realms of spirit, the integration of your shadow, healing of trauma, bringing harmony, abundance, and purpose into your life. In our Angelic Magic classes, you will explore the profound relationship between divine energies and personal growth. By connecting with the celestial angelic realms, you uncover a path to greater happiness, a stronger sense of purpose, and a life filled with abundance of all kinds, from material financial prosperity to an abundance of love and joy in your day-to-day life. Under the guidance of Ian Ferguson and our experienced angelic magic practitioners, you will learn the ancient art of theurgic angelic magic. Explore the metaphysics of magic, the hermetic principles that govern the laws of our universe, sacred rituals, divine invocations, and powerful spells that have been passed down through the ages. Our classes help you align with your higher self, unlocking the key to a more fulfilling life through personal transformation. Discover the divine light within, connect with angelic celestial beings, and navigate and transform the shadows of your internal psyche that hold you back from fulfilling your true divine purpose and mastery of your own life experience. Our course is designed to bring you peace, happiness, and abundance in all areas of your life. Don't miss this opportunity to transform your life with angelic magic and start your journey towards spiritual awakening, personal fulfillment, and a newfound prosperity and joy in your day-to-day life. It is time once again for those who feel the call to pick up the arms and armor of the Most High God and become divine protectors of humanity and join the ranks of the co-creators of this earth realm, that we might bring about a more peaceful, harmonious, and loving planet. All right, welcome once again to White Lotus of Light conversational series, and I am thrilled and honored to have Michael Flem on the show. And Michael is an author of the book. Remind me the title of your book, Michael.
Visions of Atlantis, reclaiming our reclaiming our lost ancient legacy.
Fantastic, and I'll have an image up when I do the post on this.
Sure.
But I actually saw Michael. I actually saw Michael on Tinfoil Hat after Michael had reached out to me because he had seen this show and he liked it. And Michael and I were talking off camera how we kind of have a very similar mindset. We're both very open-minded, but we really try and drill down to what's accurate wherever the truth may lead, even if that's less sexy, less popular, other theories. And I just super enjoyed Michael's interview with Sam because I just kept finding myself going, wow, that is exactly how I view things. Wow, that is exactly how I view things. And I think it's just because it seems, and I'm sure we'll have areas where we disagree, but it seems Michael and I have a very similar mindset, which is quite rare, I think, in the alternative information kind of sphere. And that is that we have that willingness to look anywhere and everywhere for information, but we want to have a certain amount of validity, secondary sources, that kind of thing before we run with it. And so, Michael, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background? And then we'll just go from there.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Ian.
Yeah.
And yeah, my background was it's quite unremarkable. Adjunct professor of history and philosophy for the past probably about 12, 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere along the lines, about 8 years ago, I got very interested in this subject of Atlantis, particularly, and couldn't tell you really why. I think I had just, I don't know, always been kind of fascinated by ancient mysteries, but was really myself focused on ancient Egypt, interested me a lot, ancient Greece, things that are a little more palatable. But inevitably, I was just drawn to this subject. And the more I looked into it, I was just astounded at how much relevant information there was on a topic that, even myself had kind of relegated to, okay, really Atlantis, we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about that. But the more I looked into it, beyond the seminal accounts from Plato and, the people that most of us are familiar with that are interested in the subject, and got into the kind of clairvoyant, channeled accounts, remote viewing accounts, and really learned myself a lot more about those subjects and how they actually function on a scientific level.
Mm-hmm.
I was really shocked at how much actually lined up with the, traces we have of this civilization from, say Plato's account in two dialogues, Critias and Timaeus. And so what I wanted to do was really kind of collate a huge range of material from oceanography, anthropology, anthroposophy, from Rudolf Steiner, from all sorts of things that, most of those camps, they're kind of, like you said earlier, they kind of stick to their paradigm and they don't play well with, an anthroposophist generally probably wouldn't talk to an oceanographer, or somebody that's into remote viewing might not want to even read critiques from, say, skeptics or professional debunkers. But I actually wanted to see what everybody from, Michael Shermer, why he so strongly disagreed with, say, Graham Hancock's theory of the Younger Dryas and a lost civilization that we've, are only now beginning to recover. Why do these skeptics take such set such a stake on debunking, quote unquote, and I say, it's our job to rebunk, I suppose. But that's really what I tried to do, I guess, was just take as broad a view of this subject, and also using my training on my master's degree is in, intellectual history of ideas was one of my subfields. And I was really interested in, I hadn't seen really anybody do a long kind of view of how the story has evolved, because that's equally important. You can't just presume that every culture in every century is being objective, so to speak, on the subject. And it's quite fascinating that we ourselves are victim to our own extreme biases when it comes to a subject as vast and important as Atlantis.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. That's something that I do too, is that I try and look for I'm a practicing theurgic magician, I'm a Vedic astrologer. Those are the sort of primary things that I do. And so I'm very well versed and steeped in occultism and esoteric subjects in general. And so I rely quite heavily on my own personal gnosis and things that have come to me through the angels or through clairvoyant visions, things like that. But what I always like to do is, when I have these messages come to me, is I try and, where possible, verify them with real world tangible evidence that I can anchor to it. And whenever I have that kind of secondary thing, or another thing that I find to be quite valid is, say I have some kind of clairvoyant vision, I find someone else who's also a channel or clairvoyant or whatever, and they have a nearly identical vision. That's another form of secondary confirmation. It doesn't mean that, okay, now this is 100% dyed in the wool. I'm very capable of being scientifically minded, value. I think that one of the things that I find disturbing of what's currently going on, especially in the alternative movement, is this desire to wholesale throw out all of recorded history. It's all part of the matrix, and this
It's so important. It's so funny you said that, because as somebody who, for a living is I guess you'd say, conventional, history professor, I find that so insulting, what you just said, like how that has become a trend to, well, everything's just a mud flood, so it doesn't matter, or it's just Tartarian deception. We can't really trust any records beyond 1900. And it's like, let's really think about what you're saying here.
I have a theory as to why that is.
I'm curious to know, actually.
I believe that is an attempt, and there's a certain meteoric rise YouTuber who leans heavily on this thing. Now, listen to what you just said. No books after 1900 can be trusted, right? How many books do you own that are prior to 1900?
Yeah, 700 probably.
Are you serious?
I mean, probably. I mean, the actual physical copy, no. But the actual, like the topic, yes, probably hundreds, over 500.
So Michael is a horrible example of this. The would say 0. The vast majority of human beings would say 0. And Michael did say one thing that's important. Almost all books we have before 1900 that people have access to are digitized.
Or reprints, yeah.
Well, but especially digitized reprint matters as well. But imagine Imagine that you wanted to do a wholesale reboot of history to create
Yep.
a narrative that you want, to memory hole all of human history. Might you start with the premise that no books could be trusted before then? And then you
Yeah.
say, well, you can only rely on books before 1900. Oh, and by the way, who has those? Oh, only Google with scans. Only
Right.
me, this guy who got out of a Texas prison, I won't say his name, and I happen to have all these books scanned in. Aren't you lucky that I can provide this to you? Now I'm the gatekeeper. I'm the sole owner of this information as Google and or this obvious plant on YouTube, right? And then you can just take edits of those sections and drop in a whole section about the great Tartarian Empire and we had electricity and stuff. That doesn't exist in that book, but where are you going to get a copy, a physical copy of that book? Especially if you're a CIA agent and you bought up all the copies of that book beforehand. Now you can create this entire history completely made up, but it's the real deal because it's before 1900. And you do it by having digitization and then edits to drop in whatever bullshit historical made up lie you want. But you got to first get people to think Rome didn't exist, the Egyptians
Right.
didn't exist, they couldn't
Younger Dryas didn't exist, according to this man. Right.
make cathedrals back in the
Mm.
day because all they had is pulleys and donkeys. Do you really believe someone could make this with a chisel? Well, yeah, I do, because there's endless historical data on exactly how they did it and how laborious it was and that it took 500 years to make that cathedral or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think is going on there, and I think it's hyper dangerous. I think this
It is.
reactionary movement we're having against logic and reason and science and history, it's reasonable to question authorities, especially after what happened in 1920, but trying to be a step ahead, they're like, let's take advantage of this reactionary movement,
Mm-hmm.
completely get rid of history, except for ourselves, we'll keep the real deal, put out a completely falsified history by conspiracy theorists, right, of Tartaria and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll also keep science all to ourselves and medicine all to ourselves because people don't trust doctors and scientists anymore.
Well, you said so many things that I have always wanted to say about this particular trend, shall we say, and person who shall remain unnamed, as you mentioned.
I know you know who I'm talking about. Go ahead, though.
Oh, I'm aware of all these people. And it's quite interesting that that person also is, I mean, aggressively at war with anybody, including Plato himself, who, according to this person, according to Solon's account, Solon was smart enough to reform the laws of Athens, but he couldn't convert the Egyptian calendar into the Greek calendar when he actually said 9000 BC. 9600 BC for the fall of Atlantis, which is quite interesting because I would ask, your friend Babu Dev Mishra if, all of the other world's Yugic calendars equally made that error when they all aligned with that date for the end by the flood, by cataclysmos, by the great winter, So it's astounding to me how, to take that as a point of departure for the critique, like, you're smarter than Plato and Solon.
I know, right?
I don't think I am.
Right,
I mean,
right.
you're free to think whatever you like, but you're smarter than the first Athenian law reformer and his descendant, who's the founder of philosophy. So they were smart enough to tell the story, but they couldn't convert from Egyptian months in the lunar calendar. And it's so fascinating because I was talking about this with a friend of mine, how so many of these people that to the average untrained person appear as sages or founts of wisdom are themselves repeating, as my friend and also great writer, Alexander Cheskevich, who wrote a book in Polish that translated into English on ancient mysteries called Deja Vu. And he said, I feel like we're going through what like the early Christians went through, where the Orthodox, Baptist church fathers were just coming at you. And it's fascinating because the person you mentioned cites those sources as critics of Plato, And if you read the rest of those contextually, where they actually say why they believe the date was wrong, I mean, it's an ad hominem attack against Plato beef that precedes those quote unquote corrections. So I always tell people, like, you can't just, there's too much, like you said, there's too much of this TikTok, YouTube, as my source. My source is TikTok video that somebody edited really carefully. It's like, well, that's good. Or the converse is my source is an obscure book in an edition that nobody owns, and you have to take my word on it.
Yeah.
All of the sources I use, I always tell people, look, I don't speak ancient Greek. I read a little bit of Latin. I speak Spanish, but that doesn't help me with this topic. I don't pretend to know all the nuances of all ancient languages, let alone I would never presume to know all the calendrical dating systems and all of their nuances. So I defer to experts that do,
Yes.
like Babu or other people. And it's like overwhelmingly that 9600 BC date for the, if you want to call it final fall, third destruction of Atlantis, is not an arbitrary date.
Yeah.
It's geologically confirmed.
100%.
In modern science, it's indisputable. What caused it, we can debate, but it's indisputable from thermobaric records that is the time the Holocene began. So if it's a mistake that Plato made, it's a very good guess. Also, if, like you said, nothing happened before, the reset in 1901, then what are we talking about when all ancient cultures are using this 25,800 year, precessional yogic cycle? Why would they need these kinds of calendrical systems if, the phoenix or something always comes and resets everything? So I think,
I love
we
how we're
can
just
all,
like just
well, you know what though?
Yeah.
Well, we can all watch The Matrix and, sprinkle our own little things on it, and that's cool. But I wouldn't make a career out of it. And I also wouldn't, again, presume to be the sole authority on anything. I welcome criticism of my book. I've always enjoyed people reading it and saying, hey, I believed 95% of this aspect, but, maybe Edgar Casey was actually doing this. Hey, maybe he was. That's great. I appreciate that. I'm not going to hit you over the head and say, come to my address and I'm going to show you what Edgar Casey said.
God.
I'm not going to do that.
Right.
I'm not going to threaten my colleagues or the people that read my books. And I don't think it's particularly productive, but look, I mean, as we saw in the response of the critics to Graham Hancock's entire career, or God forbid, when he tries to step out into the mainstream with documentaries like Ancient Apocalypse or debating Flint Dibble, how insane the true believers get when challenged by a polite, thoughtful man who's just trying to ask questions. And it's like, I always think he's almost doing a psychological experiment where, without saying anything, he's just showing you, look, you could say all you want about how open-minded academia is or archaeological study, fields are, but you're not even, you're sitting there with a straight face and telling me 90-degree angles on Yonaguni are naturally occurring. It's like, it's astounding how far these people will go to just rope off the debate. And it could be from a mainstream perspective, as you said, gatekeeping, or it could be from this wackadoo, out of the blue alternative field, which may indeed have, much like I believe it's been proven that flat Earth was seeded into the zeitgeist in the 80s by the CIA. And I think even Michael Aquino was involved in a few experiments with seeing how people would react to quote unquote evidence of the flat Earth, to just see how ideas disseminate. Yeah, I did read that anecdotally, but
I noticed it was interesting that one of the things I loved about that interview with Sam Tripoli is you had nothing in the background, but you had a little globe right in the front, right? I can tell you right now, I'm going to lose 10 or 15 subscribers off this part of the conversation. I don't care, because I'm not interested in being popular. I'm interested in doing my absolute best, and I'm imperfect, to find the truth. And one of the things people need to be aware of is that there's this very common thing that the people who I believe run the world, the Venetian black nobility, have been using in various different ways for a long time. The first way they use it is they create this egregore of the Jews are the source of all evil on earth, or the Jews can do whatever they want. And people stop right there and they don't look at that. There's a layer before the Jewish layer of conspirators that is more powerful and that have existed longer, that have existed since ancient Babylon. These Babylonian sorcerers who use money magic, who started using Jewish frontmen. So that's one example of this splitting to where they give you two false leads. Another example is, I'm borrowing from Dr. Joseph Farrell here, and I think he's on the money. He said what happened at Roswell, now I'll lose some more subs saying what I believe is true that's unpopular. What happened at Roswell was for the dumb kids, right? For the mainstream academic, blue-pilled Biden voters, they say it's a weather balloon at Roswell.
Right.
And then for the conspiracy theorists, they say it's little green men. The reality was it was a Nazi, post-war Nazi international surveillance advanced craft, probably a wing aircraft, may or may not have been anti-gravity. It might have just been the Horton brothers
Could have been
aircraft.
Yeah, the Horton brothers were building those that looked, and actually I might take issue with part of that statement just because that is a subject I've looked at. I'm not trying to discredit you, but that's something that really has interested me for a decade. But you're right. The shape itself was described by all witness accounts as a wing, not as a disc.
Even if this example is incorrect, right, Roswell, I'm super open to, because there was radar, there was nuclear explosions, and there was radio, all of which are frequencies that we've been putting off since the 20s to 40s that would attract extraterrestrials using, tools to look for energy coming off a planet to show that there's advanced civilization. We started putting them off big time, starting in the 20s with radio, then
that's right.
Radar and nuclear explosions in the 40s would have been seen at great distances. And all three of those could be observed at White Sands, New Mexico, which is right over the hill from Roswell.
That's right.
Regardless of what happened there, it could have been aliens. But I like this idea of having a false lead for normies that are just, you can tell them whatever you want, just condition them from birth, and they'll buy anything. And then a big conspiracy theory for people who are a little more suspicious and anti-authoritarian, right?
Absolutely.
And that both can be wrong, right?
Absolutely.
A good example is like, let's say the Earth is hollow, right? I'm just going to give an example that there's entrances at the poles, like some people believe that it's a tube toroid, which I'm open to this, but I haven't seen incontrovertible proof other than that this shape does appear in nature. Let's say you wanted to keep people away from that information. For the people, you might say it's a globe. For the conspiracy theorist set, you might say it's flat Earth, when the reality is that perhaps there's entrances at the poles, there's some inner-Earth civilization. I'm just giving examples, and I'm not even saying any of these ones I've said are correct. I'm saying that people are suspicious that since the 1940s, especially since the end of World War II, that history has been heavily edited, even by historical standards, right? It's always been the victor writes history. Like some people now even think that Emperor, is it Nero? I forget, one of the emperors, whoever was, I guess it was Nero, fiddled while Rome burned, that's actually a totally false thing, that a later rival emperor who hated Nero read the books in order to say that Nero did nothing during that.
Well, I mean, think about this as well, Ian. I was reading a great biography of Alexander the Great recently from the 70s by Robin Lane. And he even says, look, there are 0 surviving firsthand accounts from a actual historical figure with very little, the supernatural element to the story, just a Macedonian warlord walking to India on conquest. And even from that, from 2,400 years ago, not long before Plato, or excuse me, after Plato, there are no surviving firsthand accounts. Every single account that we read, Arion, Appian, hundreds of years later, based on alleged firsthand accounts from his bodyguards and friends. So we don't even know half of the things Alexander said could have been totally falsified by, his dynastic rivals, or at the time to make him look good and to make, one of Parmenion look stupid and things like that. But just the fact that, from an not so controversial subject, or like you said, from Roman times, how much of those power hungry emperors changed things. It's It's absolutely the case. And that's why I was very skeptical with any sort of source talking about Atlantis, because I really wanted to focus on, like, what are we dealing with here? You know, it's almost like, what kind of problem is this? And I realized it's not just a historical problem, you know, that a lot of people have just been approaching it from that lens of, give me a date, give me a time, what's the Plato footnote? What I realized, it's almost like was the vehicle for a book that turned into, almost like you said, an investigation of how history itself is written, using the case study of Atlantis as a window and example.
Mm.
But it turned into something much more than just, this is what he said about Atlantis. This is what the Mahabharata said. This is what I really didn't want it to just be this dry catalog of, there are other excellent books on that. But it really is showing you from, look, we're going to go from pre-Platonic sources to 2024 or 2022 when the book came out. And what do all these people say, and why? And why was the debate so polarized at a specific time? And it's interesting because, as you mentioned, our dear friend on the channel that shall not be mentioned recently lambasted and ridiculed Ignatius Donnelly, which I found quite interesting, calling him an idiot, and he was laughed off the stage back in 1848 because no real serious person listened to him. And it's like, you're talking about a congressman, you're talking about Abraham Lincoln's best friend, you're talking about the man that repopularized the entire concept of Atlantis.
Yep.
In the 19th century, almost single-handedly rebooted it, was the Graham Hancock of the 19th century.
Beautifully.
Wouldn't call the Antediluvian World a silly or frivolous book. And again, the actual history, if you did the historiographical research, that overwhelmingly, up until quite recently, Ian, I would say even 20 plus 22, 23 years, many serious people looked at this subject with absolute open eyes and welcomed more evidence. Yeah. And that I wanted to convey to the audience that actually, since the story emerged, let's just take Plato, even though there are 6 accounts before that I mentioned, but let's just take Plato as the point of departure. Mm-hmm. Really, since that story, there have been people who have nitpicked aspects of it. But I always tell people, in 1877, thereabouts 79, when the mid-Atlantic ridge was discovered by oceanographers near the Azores, these are mainstream oceanographers. They're not channelers. They're not thaumaturgic magicians. They came back to London on the Challenger and gave a lecture that was turned into an article in Scientific American. The article was called Glimpses of Atlantis. And what they said was, it now appears that multiple streams of data, scientific, ancient Greek, are converging. And that old story that Solon told, to his friend Critias that went down to Plato, now appears to be based more in fact than speculation. Could you imagine National Geographic, head team of oceanography releasing a statement like that today? No, because the whole world has now conspired to, as you mentioned, keep this subject in the, Miss Cleo section of the used bookstore, not to be taken seriously. When in fact, the people that discovered the mid-Atlantic ridge, sitting U.S. congressmen, friends with Abraham Lincoln, who were also accomplished novelists, many historians, Plato prefaces the critique, I believe it's the Critias or Timaeus, with that line where Socrates says, this is a strange story, but every word of it is true. It was vouched for by Solon, the wisest of the 7 sages. Yep. You wouldn't preface a myth with that, right, if it was purely mythological. You also wouldn't give as specific dimensions of the landmass and the capital cities, circular moats and the rings and the depth. Why would you need to do that in a purely mythological, allegorical story?
You wouldn't.
You wouldn't.
So I'm gonna actually, I had a totally completely different order, but I love to have like organic flowing conversation. So I'm actually gonna propose to you what I think one of the main things about Atlantis is. That is that I have a very despite like bagging on people with junk conspiracy theory, right? Which is just rife, right?
It is.
Cass Susteen was an Obama appointee, cabinet member, whatever, and he said in 2009, boy, we can't do anything about these 9/11 truthers. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to COINTELPRO infiltrate
Yep.
the conspiracy theory movement, specifically with what? Wait for it. False conspiracy theories to get people to waste times and be divisive, right?
Right.
And then there's people who look to me like they're plants. I spoke with another podcaster who's a bit like kind of a tier above me in subscribers. He said that he had been suspicious of one fellow podcaster and outright asked him, and they said, "Yeah, I work for an intelligence group, and we'd love to come on board." That's what he said.
Wow.
It was.
No, I respect that. I believe you, though.
There's also,
I mean, look, this has been going on, not to cut you off, but I mean, that's a subject I've studied and written about extensively, intelligence operations, and particularly the history of the United States. Deception and COINTELPRO is something I know quite well. And look, I mean, going back to the Kennedy assassination and the aftermath, I mean, that famous memo countering criticism of the Warren Commission from 1967 basically said, we need to create the idea of a conspiracy theorist. And you absolutely are sure that, I mean, I've even thought many times Mark Lane was a very suspicious person with his connections to Jonestown later on. And, his debate with David Atlee Phillips seemed quite strange to me, although he has done good work. So it always, it's very, you have to be very, I think, aware, as you mentioned, when somebody has all the right answers, they come out of nowhere and they have a vehement hatred for other quote unquote alternative people. That's generally the red flag,
absolutely.
Because I've never seen you, Babu, me, Freddie Silva, Graham Hank. I've never seen any of those people viciously attack somebody else. Like even on the show recently, Hancock was kind of asked on the spot by I think it was when Flint Dibble said, well, Robert Schoch's a geologist, you're not a geologist, and doesn't he think that Yonaguni is a natural formation? And instead of saying, well, Robert Schoch's an idiot and I should, Hancock said, he said, look, when I first took him on the dive, he thought it was man-made. Then he changed his mind. That's his right. He's still my friend. It doesn't mean that he hates Robert Schoch because Robert Schoch thinks Yonaguni is not a megalithic city. And I just find it so interesting, as you mentioned, that not just that particular channel, but so many others, let's say, who perhaps are interested in circular formations in the deserts of North Africa.
Yeah.
And how that has become this kind of out of nowhere
the recon structure
obsession, right? And I'm not saying that I believe that this person is a plant or anything, but it's just I always tell people, I mentioned that in the book as well, the Richat structure, but beware of shiny objects.
Yes.
Beware of smoking guns. That's really not even relevant because we're talking in the case of Atlantis. If you take Edgar Casey's account or Frederick Oliver's channeled account, two of the most internally coherent, compelling, and evidence, I would argue, based clairvoyant accounts. That's why I picked them out of hundreds of others. And the first two people to ever channel this subject in the 19th and early 20th century. If you take their accounts, you're talking about a civilization that at least spanned conservatively 50,000 plus years, that went through 3 iterations: continental, 5 islands, then 3, which is the one Plato was describing at the end of the Younger Dryas. What could you find that's a smoking gun from 50,000 years and essentially a mid-Atlantic and the world over, given their colonies, type civilization? that would say that's it. It's like I tell people, if you found the Tower of London in 14,000 years from now, did you find the British Empire? No, you found an artifact from the capital city of the progenitor culture, you know? So we should be very careful with when people say, we're never going to find it. It's like, what are you looking for first? Let's be clear on what we're looking for. If you're looking for the lost ancient legacy and its fingerprints and its traces and clues and the kind of glue that would explain these weird anomalies that we see, like megalithic architecture that resembles each other, the fact that people in the Basque country have a very similar syntactically language than people in the Yucatan, and Edgar Casey said those are two exact places that the survivors of this final cataclysm went before the final destruction. And these are more important to me than this, I found this rock and it has a precision cut that says this date and that's my proof. My proof is, look, if everything you read in my book after 400 pages still does not convince you that there's something missing from the bigger picture of pre-recorded history, if you want to call it that, because I don't like to say prehistory. There was a lot of history. It's just pre-recorded history, as I say. Then, that's your prerogative. And I'm not going to convince you otherwise. If you are skeptical of both mainstream and, as you should be, this other thing that's going on, and you want to see an actual, not to flex, but a trained historian who's trained in the pitfalls of assumption and history writing from being a history professor, but who's also open to, say, unconventional type sources like channeled accounts, channeled books, hypnagogic trance session, transcripts, and then looking at how those things line up with archaeoastronomy, oceanography, anthropology, linguistics in a total way that's actually exciting, because it's not just an encyclopedia of Atlantean facts. It's actually a story that's told as almost like a Michael Crichton type novel is how I tried to write it, so it keeps going. Every chapter is a little bit different, but you come back to that central theme of Atlantis.
So I love all that, and I'm just realizing that I'm going to absolutely have to have you back on the show, and perhaps very, very soon. I actually will want to talk to you about something off camera when we're done here. Relevant to that. So what I was going to say, and loved everything you said, and just you had the bit in your teeth, and I was like, go, Michael, go. Like, I love everything you said. I was going to say, I think that Atlantis is hidden for a very specific reason, that the so-called ruling elite are hyper aware of it. They know it, they know its reality, and that they have gone out of their way to suppress anything before 6,000 years ago, historically. I believe the reason for that is exactly when civilization begins, just happens to be when the Kali Yuga starts.
Yes, isn't that interesting?
The Bible starts then, Jewish history starts then, everything starts then, and there's literally nothing anywhere on earth that you can find of any kind of record other than these myths and so forth that are discredited, right? Like any kind of traces we have of prehistory, even though we have incontrovertible evidence now with Göbekli Tepe.
We do. And see, this is so interesting, Ian, because it's almost like people were either, the only way I can think about it is people were so pissed off. I remember when that story hit the news. I was teaching, I think it was 08 or some 09 when it really started to come out, like what this was, and the dating was pretty much incontrovertible at that point, that put it back to about 10,500 roughly BC. And it's almost like you said, as if people just ignored that, and it's like, again, it's not an arbitrary date, it's the same, literally the same date Edgar Casey said in 1932, without a degree in archaeology or Egyptology, for the beginnings of the mass emigrations to that part of the world, Anatolia and Egypt, in preparation for the coming destruction. And again, I picked Edgar Casey because this is long before Robert Bauval, Robert Schoch, Graham Hancock, and that whole group.
Right.
started using that 10,500 window and the Younger Dryas. Edgar Cayce was saying this in 1926, 27, 29, when people didn't even think human beings were that old still in mainstream science in 1920. We forget that, you know, so I think it's absolutely astounding, as you mentioned, that these people, particularly the Vatican Library, does not have smoking gun proof in an actual document that they stole from the Library of Alexandria or something of Atlantis. Of course they do.
So
they must.
That was revealed on the on my channel like quite a while ago. I was blown away by this. So among other things, I'm a Templar, right? Templar, and the Grand Master of my order, I think, has one of the most credible claims of any Templar group out there to the ancient original Templar group that was suppressed in the 1300s, right? He said that Napoleon was either a Templar or an affiliate of the Templar, and that when he conquered Rome, he took basically the entirety of the Vatican Library, took it back to France, where the Templar made copies of all of it and then gave it back to them.
Really?
Supposedly there's a second cache controlled by Templar of basically pretty much the entirety of the contents of the library of the Vatican archives.
Oh, well, I've never heard that. Wow.
Yeah,
that would be tremendous if it were true. Wow.
I was utterly astonished when he said this, and I don't know. He just, for sure, like I know him personally. For sure, he is really like hyper deeply plugged in, and it's really weird because sometimes he'll be like, "Oh, you know, it's just some little thing that I do," and then other times it's like, "No, this is this ancient thing that's like bringing back." And basically, the Templars' main goal, according to him, is to preserve the primordial tradition, which he says is the Atlantean tradition. So it's really that the Templar were founded by Hugh de Paynes, and that Hugh was sent by basically Charlemagne to one of Charlemagne's sons, I think, to investigate these rumors of there was these secret societies that had like advanced medicine of the world, all this kind of stuff. And so he went down to the Iberian Peninsula. Then he went down to Morocco. He went over to Timbuktu, the actual place. And then he eventually made his way to the Giza Plateau, or the Tauru. And there, some unknown secret group gave him a charter to found the Knights Templar and told him, hey, we want you to go find some of these legacy remnants of the primordial tradition, the Atlantean stuff. He then goes to Constantinople, in a full like few decades before it's commonly known, they founded the Templar. And then the Templar one of the first things they did, of course, was they excavated the Temple Mount.
Right.
According to Timothy Hogan, they got a copy of the Zohar, took it to the Iberian Peninsula, and had a rabbi translate it, and asked for translations in a few different languages, and otherwise gave it to the rabbi, right? And the Zohar talks about 7 continents, right? Which would include Antarctica, which is insane, right?
That is insane.
All this kind of information that is antediluvian in character, and that they went around and they dug things up all over the Near East, and then basically continued to do that, and were able to flee the oppression or suppression of the order. They knew it was coming, so they got a bunch of their like treasure and like artifacts and so forth out of there. And so I'm of the opinion that there's a conflict that's going on behind the scenes, and that for the past 6,000 years, this group that I call the Molochians, right? You can also call them the Venetian black nobility, Babylonian, whatever you want.
Children of Belial, as Edgar Cayce, sons of Belial, as Edgar Cayce called them.
I want to get into exactly that here in just a second. But they have gone out of their way. This consciousness, which emanates from a deity, but is also just a level of consciousness, has been pervasive on the planet for 6,000 years. And one of the things this consciousness seems to want to do more than anything else is destroy any record of any alternative.
Yes.
Their big thing is there is no alternative. That was literally something H.W. Bush and his crew were saying back in the early 80s. We got to put out there is no alternative to what we're doing. What we're doing is inevitable, it's unassailable, it's all powerful, right? That's why blackpilling bullshit of the elites are all in lockstep. It's just not true.
No, it's not.
Right? That this whole idea is it creates fear and paralysis. It's a psychological warfare thing. And literally the Venetian black nobility took that name as a flex on other people. What are you going to do to stop us? And if you look all over the world, the same thing happens of ancient knowledge gets wiped out in purges, right? You mentioned the library.
Right.
That's probably the most famous example, but the Yellow Emperor, the first emperor of China,
Right.
the exact
Right.
thing. And
Right.
he was really good.
Yeah. No, it's true.
Really cleansed it, right?
Yeah.
Then you have these weird anomalies of like red-haired and blonde-haired mummies in
Right.
northwestern China.
In the Altai Plains. Yeah. And it's true. And it's like, that's another absolutely unknown point of the Casey readings, which, I mean, I've gone into so much depth with those just even after I read the book. Probably read thousands of them, you know, front to back, the transcripts. And what he says about that is actually unbelievable. What he talks about this city of gold, you know, in the Altai Mountains near, you know, the Gobi Desert and things like this, and how in that same concurrent with, say, Atlantis before the cataclysm of the Younger Dryas, the end of it, there was this enormously advanced city with gold where almost everything was covered in gold, Casey said. And even mentioned that at one point when we uncover the city of gold in the Gobi Desert, which used to be, again, he said this in 1927 or something, this reading, where he's described actually exactly what the Gobi Desert was 12,000 years ago, which was a fertile grassland, you know, which is an interesting guess for a 7th grade dropout who's only read the Bible in the newspaper, according to his son, Hugh Lynn Casey. But he said, you'll find elevators that go down deep. You'll also find what he called the craft, the aerial craft of high velocity.
Wow. Chill.
Which this culture had in ancient, what we would call Inner Mongolia. And it just makes you wonder, you know, and he's like, under the vast sands of the Gobi Desert lies the city of gold. And it's like, I find it hard to believe with, you know, with the technology we are allowed to see, like LiDAR, you know, for commercial use, that the actual government and all of their black special access programs has not mapped the entire surface of the earth 10 times over and knows all of this shit, you know. And even if they haven't excavated because of, you know, public scrutiny or something, that they're absolutely aware, you know, and that it's probably 20 to 30 year time lag, so that, you know, we find out last year, oh, there's a whole city in Guatemala that nobody's seen. It's like, I doubt that we're the first people to see that scan, you know, like you're telling me the government with all their satellites, the keyhole satellites that could read license plate in the 60s and 70s, hadn't penetrated the jungle canopy in a country they've overthrown. Like, I really doubt that, you know. But I think it's like you said, it's a combination of like willing deception from the Venetian black nobility or the children of Belial, or just this sordid legacy of Babylonian weirdos that go back to the original, quote unquote, original civilization. But it's also probably just overwhelming for them. Like, because the preponderance of evidence is so against what we are taught, you know. That's the funny thing that most people don't realize, is that actually the preponderance of evidence, even for the Giza Plateau not being what we are taught, is overwhelming. And if we treated any other subject the way we treat these subjects, I mean, you would be thrown out of school, you know, because if you if you tried to tell somebody that, you know, the Empire State Building is it's an ornate mausoleum to house office spaces at the first floor. You know, if you told somebody that in 5,000 years, they would probably look at you like, yeah, but what, didn't it do some other things? No. This was a simple culture that just built this monumental, towering structure with all this technology in it to house this Starbucks at the ground floor. The rest is just symbolic, you know? And it's like, that's what we're taught, you know. Oh, the shaft's symbolic, you know, the Grand Gallery, symbolic, you know. Could it have had technology and Helmholtz, you know, resonators like Christopher Dunn says? That makes more sense. but we're so arrogant and we're so kind of, I think it's arrogance, really. We don't really like to admit that they had this, piezoelectric resonant device that did a multitude of things. And, yeah, we have rockets that could land. We have electric cars. Wow. We have Skype. Congratulations. But we don't have this kind of Tesla level that we never went to. Or maybe some people in the Black nobility have that ability to do those things that Tesla could only, experiment on without rolling out. But we are left with the Rockefeller, melon legacy of fossil fuels and, eat your white bread and Kellogg's and shut up and go to bed.
Well, it's interesting because I think that, if you look at to me, narratives are like so incredibly important. I don't think people understand that narratives dominate everything. Literally all of our human experience is utterly dominated by certain narratives, and there's certain narratives that are master narratives. And one of
Yes.
those critical master narratives that is absolutely key to control is this inevitability of progress. And
Yes.
underlying that is this unbelievably false idea that civilization has just been getting better and better and better and better and better over time, and we're
Yeah.
working towards some utopian thing. I know it looks dystopian, but or maybe it's going inevitably to a dystopian thing. Either one of those
You're right.
fine.
No, and again, it's such
a dystopia, that's fine. Just as long as you believe that there's some inevitable thing happening, that's all that matters. But if you were to realize that there's rises and falls,
yes.
falls, that would put into question, could what we're doing be wrong?
Right. No, it's so important, Ian, because not just the dangers of binary thinking and the stupidity of, as you said, it's all going to shit, Blackpill, dystopia, Westworld, Fallout, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Or as you mentioned, Jesus is coming back next year, and he and Trump are riding into DC on white horses, and General Flynn will be there with the Gesara, and it's like, okay, maybe we should actually look at what do people who are much smarter than probably any living philosopher from antiquity say about the nature of reality. And as your, guest Babu, I think quite conclusively proved, well, we could be great, but according to the Yuga cycle, we are 1 year away from the absolute lowest point of human consciousness. And what would a culture at the lowest point of human consciousness be telling itself? That they are the best, because arrogance and greed and deception and delusion are a part of the bottom end of the Yuga cycle of the Kali Yuga. So it actually makes sense to me that even if the comet hit tonight, people would still say, yeah, but Jesus is behind that comet on a white horse. We have failed to, as a culture, at least in the West where I grew up in America, that's not even in our vocabulary, failure or decline. Like,
yeah,
we would rather nuke the world, I believe, than let Russia and China succeed while we not even fail, but just kind of lose the spotlight. And a lot of the West toes the line, or you could say we are still the slave of the British, who never really lost the Revolutionary War and just kind of let us more efficiently spread the British Empire. That's always been my kind of one interpretation of it. But I think you're absolutely right that we need to get out of this way of thinking and just be comfortable with contingency, not knowing all the answers. That's okay. That actually the dumbest people are the people with the strongest convictions about anything.
absolutely.
I've always said that, that the dumbest people you will meet, I don't care how compelling or convincing or exciting they are, how great their background is in their webcam. If somebody is telling you what to think, you should be very skeptical of them.
Right, absolutely. That's why I try and say all the time, like, you're not going to agree with everything in the show. If you do, you should probably ask yourself, why are you giving your power away to me and or my guests, right? And take a closer look at your psychology there, because you're looking for someone talking about white knight, someone to ride in and rescue you. And it's far better. I try and always, with my clients, return the power to them. I have a lot of clients now who they want to give their power to me. And I'm like, nope, no, thank you. Let's figure out how you can unlock your power and change your own frame of mind and relationship to yourself so you can learn to trust your internal guidance above all else, because that's really what, at the end of the day, you have to go on as a soul on a journey of spiritual awakening over many, many lifetimes. And so I absolutely agree. Anyone who's saying, I have all the answers, I have this secret magical little book that nobody else has, and like in this book it says Ian's so smart and Ian knows everything, you know, you should be really concerned with anyone who's pushing that point of view, because they're either have deluded themselves, best case scenario, or they are a bad faith actor of some sort who knows very well that they're full of shit, and that means they're being manipulative and are dangerously manipulative. So how much time do we got, brother? Because I want to see if I can hit a question or two of these.
Sure. I've got about 10 minutes left.
Okay, so let's we're gonna have to have you back, and then I want to speak with you for a couple minutes off camera. Have to have you back because we didn't even scratch the surface here. We actually got into a really interesting contextual discussion about history and like perception, which I think is incredibly important. But I want to make sure that we, at the end of this, have your book, and got to have you back on to talk more about your book. It just, that's how the conversation flowed, and I'm totally fine with that. But I want to make sure get you on. So the Brotherhood of Belial. So the Brotherhood of Belial, or perhaps Baal. So Belial, the qliphothic spirit, which you may or may not be aware of, is basically a revolutionary. It's a revolutionary spirit that destroys whatever the dominant paradigm is. It's very much, in Dungeons and Dragons terms, you could say it's chaotic, neutral, slightly chaotic evil. Like it's a force to where its main goal is to disrupt the dominant paradigm. It's not the way most people think. Most people think it's just evil, but that's not actually what it is. It's that it wants to destroy the dominant paradigm. So at the time of Atlantis, the end of the Golden Age, beginning of the Silver Age, when the final fall occurs, that group would have wanted to take down this most high consciousness.
That's right.
Right.
And that's actually so interesting, Ian, that you clarified that, because that is how Edgar Cayce described, you know, the Sons of Belial, this loose group of people from all classes, that it wasn't just some evil priesthood with necromancers and, you know, it was actually, like you said, it was people with that kind of, I guess you would say, for lack of a better word, like that Luciferic revolutionary type, breaking down this, what he would call the children of the law of one, who themselves were not purely an enlightened priesthood. Many of them had slaves, according to Cayce. Many of them were, you know, cheating in their rituals and, you know, screwing people over. And that the Belial group was a necessary foil, you know, to drive the technological and material progress of Atlantis, because the priesthood had themselves kind of removed themselves from materiality in a sense, and were kind of letting the people go. So I think that's very important that, you know, even today, I look at the Black nobility as an important foil to, and I don't particularly even believe in the whole dualistic, you know, good and evil spectrum myself, but as a necessary aspect of reality that will always exist, probably.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it rises and falls in terms of its scope. And so at the end of the Golden Age, the consciousness was falling, and we were moving towards the Luciferian ages of the descending Silver Age, which is like Empire of Rama, according to Bibu.
Right.
And then, which is actually the Empire of Rama. I think Bibu puts it at the tail end of the Silver Age and the crossover into the Dwapara Yuga. So according to what the angels have told me, they've said that during the Kali Yugas, this Molochian consciousness and that deity rules, right? And the Luciferian consciousness, which is more technological, meritocratic, sort of libertarian, narcissistic rather than self-hating, right? That consciousness is sublimated and has to serve that until the end of the Kali Yuga, and then that consciousness can break free and destroy, by and large, wipe out that lower Molochian consciousness to make way for this huge scientific, spiritual, but false light, narcissistic, putting humans at the center. Humans are
Mm,
God. Rather than destroying God altogether, it's that humans are God or should replace God, right?
right,
And then
right.
as you continue up, eventually Most High Consciousness comes up. So this Brotherhood of Belial group was not, it wasn't the Molochian consciousness. It was actually just a consciousness that had to break the dominant paradigm, and in a certain sense did serve the Luciferian force, because it acted as the tarot card, the chariot. It acted as this revolutionary force that had to sweep things away. One of the
Mm,
things that angels told me this year is that the Belial is going to come and operate through these different like terrorist cells, the illegal immigrants that have planted CCP and other governments,
mm.
rogue actors, and BLM. And some of these groups are going to, when they're released, when those Hounds of Wars are released, they're going to actually turn back on their masters, because
Nice.
they've realized that the masters have sold them and their families out, and they want to bring about chaos, and they just want to burn. They just want to see the world burn, like the Joker, the Heath Ledger Joker, right?
Right. Right. No, that's such a great, I mean, summary. And it echoes so many of my own thoughts observing, like you said, that there must come a day when the hound bites the hand that thinks it's feeding it. Because it's just like with, the sordid history of United States overthrows and installing dictators. It doesn't always go the way you want,
Right.
Sometimes Saddam or Noriega or others don't do what Daddy Bush tells them to do, and you got to deal with that. And so at this point, it only makes sense. And I always tell people, like, what more evidence do you need that we are at that end point of the Kali Yuga, just on a emotional level? Like,
Yeah.
if this isn't it, I honestly don't know what could be. I,
Right.
I really don't. It wouldn't even make sense to me. It would just be over, because even though there hasn't been, in on a local visceral level. I mean, I don't even live in the United States anymore. I live in Monterrey, Mexico. But
Mhm.
like, to the citizens of, say, Chicago, where I used to live, um, you could make the case like, oh yeah, no, nothing's changed, but it's like, if you don't think like we have almost experienced like 100 years in the past four, it's
Yeah.
like, I don't understand where you've been living. Like, I feel like I'm 97 years old today,
Yeah.
just having lived through 2020 to 2024.
Absolutely.
Like it's been, and everyone I talk to, not just with the COVID horse shit and all of that, but just with everything, like everything. It's almost like you've condensed a century into 4 years, and it is fast approaching this 2025 point, which again, as Babu in Yuga Shift would say, it's not like the comet comes then. Like, if you look at
Mhm.
his book or others, in the Cataclysmos period that destroyed Atlantis, it was 26 or something that came in over a span. So who's to say the fire, the ekpyrosis, cleansing we're going to go through for 1200 years, according to the ancients? Does it have to be nuclear war? Does it have to be solar events? Does it have to be a comet? I don't know. It could be something maybe pleasant for some people. Like you
I,
said, maybe it's that the agents of Belial, just maybe the fire is burning down the Vatican or something. I don't know. Not that I'm advocating that.
I think that there'll be both. Clearly, there's going to be cataclysmic events. Clearly, there's going to be war. Clearly, there's going to be mass death. That I have no doubt. What I don't believe will happen intuitively, which just doesn't make sense to me, is that there'll be any kind of like wiped out, right?
Mm,
Like the way there was at the end of Atlantis, where civilization was
right.
almost completely obliterated.
Right.
I don't think that's going to happen, because we're on an ascending cycle. What I
That's right.
happen is elements of society, pillars of it that are Molochian, are going to crumble. There's going
Right.
to be destabilization, but I think very quickly these Luciferians, because it's what they want, they're going to fill in the void, and they're going to create a new global civilization very, very rapidly, that they already
Mm.
have ready to go. They have all the elements they need,
Yeah.
and we're going to start building from there. And then at
Mm.
the end of the Silver Age, what will happen is consciousness will just be too high, The same way people are sick of the Molochian pedo black magician, so sick
Mm-hmm.
of it now, people will be sick of the Luciferian narcissistic self-improvement. The hollowness of that will eventually fade and give way to, we want true wisdom. We don't want
Mm.
intelligence anymore. We want wisdom. Right now, people are like, can we have just a lick of intelligence? Like, for the love of God, this Molochian thing, this last gasp of the Molochians is so intensely anti-intellectual, anti-thought of any kind. Go ahead.
And isn't it, you said something just before we go, because I got about 5 minutes left
Yeah.
before gotta
I want to
teach.
plug your book. And
But
then,
it's so interesting what you said. I
Mhm.
don't even know if you realized it in that last bit where you said, we are going to get sick of this. And I think that's such an important part of why these trends endure. Like you said, people are sick of the Molochian excess pedo creepazoid thing. But think about how long that's been going on. Nobody cared. It was fine. It was permissible. And I think not absolving yourself of responsibility, like you said, not putting yourself in the hands of other people, even as the victim, is so important when
Yeah.
it comes to these quote unquote ages and, breaking free from these masters. Like I always used to tell people that would say, spend hours making documentaries on how evil Bill Gates is and you all know Harari. And I'm like, if you saw both of them in cargo shorts and a t-shirt in a park, are you afraid of these people? Really? You're afraid of these people? These are scary people. What does that say about you? And yet you are, advocating for some, global revolution to take them down. I'm like, you don't even deal with people like that. You just go around them. Do you know what I mean? First of all, you're not in a position to take down groups of people that have billions of dollars with YouTube videos on the platform they control. Let's just be clear about that. You can spread awareness, but better to just look at them for what they are in your own power. Like, I'm not afraid of you all, Noah Harari.
Mhm.
I'm not afraid of any Klaus Schwab. He's in the, got a colostomy bag now or something in the hospital. What is he going to do to me if I do not engage with that stupid frequency, like you said, of this man will be God and the chip and this? And it's like, yeah, great. Do that. That's fine. I don't give a shit about that. I'm not going to do that. I'm still going to pay in cash here in Mexico and get my coffee and go to the park with a girl and live my life. Like, it doesn't even enter my mind that that would be affecting me. And
Mm.
I know that's like sounds escapist, but I think if most people just kind of
There's
looked at things that way, like, look, let these freaks do that. Why are you trying to change them? They're not going to change. They're playing a very important role in this cosmic drama.
Yeah, and I think it's unavoidable. I mean, I think that the changeover from the Luciferians is the Luciferians from the Molochians, their taking of power is inevitable. I mean, it's literally baked in. It can't be stopped. And that what is important is exactly what you're saying. The way that we are dealing with our own internal temple, with our own internal space, and how we are reacting to these
Mm,
events. And it starts with healing and dealing with yourself. I just did a video called the trident of self-awareness or something like that. I forget exactly what it's called. But in that I talk about personal responsibility, overcoming trauma, overcoming victim consciousness.
mm,
That is. But real quick before I let you go, and I do want to, if you have just a minute when we're off camera,
sure,
send it to you. Real quick, even though we barely scratched the surface, I will have you back super, super soon at literally
sure.
as we can do it because I want to delve into that. But this conversation I feel is really important actually that we
Mm,
had today, and I think is under discussed. This whole discernment, reality, history, manipulation, I think is so important, everything we talked about today. But I do want to get into the substance of your book in a future episode. Tell people, what is your book again? What's it called? What's the title?
sure.
Where can they find you?
Yeah, it's called Visions of Atlantis, Reclaiming Our Lost Ancient Legacy. You can get it on Amazon. It's
Mm-hmm.
also available in Spanish. You just
Mm.
click on my name, and audiobook and Kindle as well. And if you have any questions, you can go to Michael Leflem, where my last name is one word, leflem.com. And there's a contact form if you have any questions or insights. And I always enjoy, because every day somebody sends me some weird source that I've never read. And I go, wow, that's really interesting that, people are still Interested in this because to me it was like just my kind of vision or my take on it after 7, 8 years of studying the subject.
Mhm.
And it was never meant to be the final will and testament. It's just
Mhm.
something that I found interesting. And to my great surprise, it went to #1 bestseller last year and was selected as book of the month for Graham Hancock's website. So I thought that was really nice that, it finally got the kind of recognition because I just had a bunch of notes in my drawer that my girlfriend at the time told me I should publish. And I, like you, just am interested in the strange highness of reality. And I had no intention of ever writing a book and let alone, reaching the kinds of people that it's reached. So maybe that in itself is, the best kind of reward, that something you didn't even think was going to be shared with anybody beyond your friends who were sick of talking about it, that it actually got out there and, people seem to like it. So that's very cool.
I love that. Well, Michael, thank you so much. Got to have you back. I'll talk with you after, but we'll go ahead and wrap up here. And please check out Michael's book. It's fantastic. He also was interviewed on Tinfoil Hat. It was a great interview, number 750, I think. And yes, and I will have Michael back very, very soon, and we'll actually get into the subject of Atlantis next time. How
But
about
I'm actually glad that we didn't, because it's, I think, a necessary prelude to set up the discussion.
interesting?
I really think that's
Love that.
not just for anticipation and stay tuned, folks, but also now where we're coming at this from. And when we say, this source or that source, you already know that we take everything with a grain of salt, but with qualifiers, because I didn't just pick random sources. I tried to spend as many years as I could vetting every single thing that I put in that damn book with 340 footnotes or something. So so I think that'll be fun, and we could actually get into the details of that subject. But no, I really appreciated it, and I had a great time, and I'd love to come back.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Michael, and stay after. But for everyone else, I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. And if you got this far, hit like and subscribe, and be sure you hit the bell so you find out when new episodes come out. All right, thank you. See you guys soon. Bye.